I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the...
Hey, welcome back to the Oregon D.O.G.E podcast. This is a discussion on government efficiency in Oregon, and we're looking at budgets. And I'm Mike McLane. I serve in the Senate for District 30. And I'm here with my good friend, Representative Jeff Helfrich.
Thanks for having me on the show, Mike. Appreciate it.
Well, it's great to be here. And of course, you're a regular. Now, one of the things I wanted to cover is what public safety agencies go through, because I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I have here a staff member who's a crackerjack, that's a good comment, researcher, Mack T. Smith. Mack, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And of course, Mack's been on before too. Mack's done a bunch of research and helped us look into the agency budget for the Oregon Youth Authority. Now, I sit on Judiciary Committee, and we go over policy bills. And then I'm also on Ways and Means, which is the budget arm of the legislature, and that's where budgets are set. And it's governed by a full Ways and Means Committee. And then there are subcommittees, and I'm on a subcommittee for capital construction, which is where state investment goes, looking at projects and things like this. But you sit on the Public Safety Subcommittee.
Yes, I do, and we've heard their budget recently.
And so I'm hoping today you could let us know. I've never sat on Public Safety Subcommittee. What's it like?
Well, when you're in the minority, it's not so fun because you have to, even though you vote no, everything's a yes coming out of there. So we know that for sure.
But do you get a say? Do you ever contribute and say, what about this?
You get to sit and ask questions. You get to hold the agencies accountable. One of the things I learned from one of our more senior members in the House was he would always say, hey, ask the agency director, is there anything that we need to know about now that you may have knowledge of that may embarrass your department or your agency? Tell us now so we don't have to find out later. Something like that, a statement like that. And it kind of puts them on their toes a little bit, like, well, not that I'm aware of. Well, OYA didn't have to ask that because it was all over the newspaper what was going on.
Interesting. So when you were reviewing the Oregon Youth Authority, OYA's budget, and having those hearings, was this before all the news came out about the lawsuits?
No, it was after. They had full. So their I can't remember their one. Let me look here. What his name was?
Joe O'Leary.
Joe O'Leary had been in the office. Had been talking about public safety and talking about all the programs they're doing, and he had no inkling what was going on. And then that news hit that he was fired, and then Raymond Byrd, and all that was pre their budget. So we had some very pointed questions toward them.
And wow. Well, so today we're going to go through the Oregon Youth Authority. And as you know, we've been going over in this podcast Oregon's budgets and talking about waste, talking about where Oregon can improve. And as we know, there is a lot going on with our federal government. And regardless of what you think, the fact is the federal budget deficit is too high. We're at approaching $37 trillion of debt. Our demographics in America and the programs that are in place means that budget debt is the national debt is going to increase. You can learn more at the national debt clock. And in any event, there's going to be a reduction, net effect of inflation, of federal funds coming to Oregon, and Oregon has undergone mission creep, a series of appropriating money from the general fund, your tax dollars, to all sorts of things. And so we're looking at the budget and asking the question, is this the government that you want? Are they spending your tax dollars the way that you believe they should be spent? And so the Oregon Youth Authority is the agency that oversees, in essence, a justice system for youth. And but houses those juveniles who have been adjudicated. Because when you're a juvenile, you're not convicted of a crime. You're adjudicated, in essence, to be in the jurisdiction of the OYA if you're sent there, and that means that the state has proven that you were a juvenile that committed a crime and that you need to be in the jurisdiction of the OYA, Oregon Youth Authority, for a period of time. And there's programs and other things. And a youth can be in the OYA up to age 25. So they could enter at any time they're a juvenile, and then they can be there up to 25. And then if they have a longer sentence, they go to Department of Corrections.
Big boy jail.
Big boy jail. And so that's what we're talking about today, is this agency that is entrusted with housing and putting through programs and youth that have been adjudicated. So, Mac, you've done some research. Let's jump into it. What do we got? What's their budget?
Okay, yeah. So for the this biennium, they're sitting at $500 million, and they're looking to go somewhere between, the governor's asking for 550, or the service level budget is 517. So that's a lot of money. And this is also the graph. The graph is probably better. So you can see the raise in time and spending, right? So back in 2003, 2005, they were in the 200s. Now they're in the 500s. So it's pretty dramatic rise over 20 years. And yeah.
So that's about a doubling the budget in about 20 years, and or at least 22 years. That's a significant increase between the last biennium, or 2003, when that was set. So the governor wants more than current service level, or just, in essence, plussing up the budget based upon what the agency determines it needs, in consultation with legislative fiscal office or the government or the governor's office, on what it needs to maintain its current service level. CSL, which we've talked about, we'll talk more about what CSL is and how that can be gamed. But the governor has requested more than that. So now we're pushing, if the legislature appropriates what the governor wants, it would be $550 million. And pretty healthy portion of that is from general fund dollars. So that is the tax revenues that Oregonians pay on their income and other sources. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So here's the mission. Oregon Youth Authority is dedicated to protecting the public and reducing crime by holding youth offenders accountable and providing opportunities for reformation and safe environments. Pretty straightforward. Their vision is that youth who leave the OIA go on to lead productive, crime-free lives. Let's hope to goodness sakes that happens, because I think we all would like to see them succeed. Now, their mission statement includes integrity, upholding ethical and honest behavior in all actions. I guess we're going to hear more about that later, won't we, Rep. Helfrich?
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to.
Professionalism, adhering to professional standards and performing work competently. We'll hear more on that. Accountability, taking responsibility for outcomes and conducting work transparently. And then respect, treating others with fairness, dignity, and compassion, and being responsive to their needs. So, pretty straightforward mission. Their mission statement is not anything I would disagree with. I would certainly hope that they accomplish that. What do you think, Jeff?
I think that's kind of boilerplate mission statements you see around the state agencies. And it's, if you can adhere to those, you can aspire to those are great. But I think the next slide you're going to see is something that's predominantly coming in more and more into politics, or more and more into government. And it's with the current administration nationally, they're pushing that out, but they're doubling down here in Oregon on it.
Let's go to the next slide. So, Jeff, elaborate.
So going to kind of bounce around here, but Raymond Byrd was hired as an investigator for investigating these complaints. And what I want to preface them.
Raymond Byrd is a former official with the OYA.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So let me step back just a minute. When you said these youth are adjudicated, so in my prior life as a police officer, I took youth to the Donald E. Long home. They were processed. You went through juvie court, and the worst of the worst offenders went to MacLaren. That was where they ended up. And I believe in redemption. I believe that you can rehabilitate people to a point if they have the right tools and the right people there and the right influences.
In MacLaren, just for the sake of the audience, that is the OYA facility. It's Wilsonville.
Wilsonville, yeah.
What kind of area? And it is the place where the youth that have been adjudicated for serious crimes are sent.
I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, rape, murder, robbery. Some serious crimes. If you're an adult felony, it's not they too many theft charges and there's shoplifting or something.
Hooligans.
These are beyond. These
serious
are serious. Have serious issues and stuff. And so, fast forward when Raymond Byrd was hired as an investigator with OIA. He thought he was just going to start investigating these crimes, but he wasn't looking for a new job. But he got recruited out of there, and out of all that when everything came out, he didn't feel he got the tools and the training and everything necessary to complete what his mission was. And then all of a sudden, he was going to be the next director. They were grooming him to be the next director, coming out of the professional standards of being the chief of that position. And if you haven't seen it, I would recommend people go back to it. But they had what they called a name clearing. And I've never heard that term before until recently, where the employee that was fired got a chance to give a statement to clear his or her name, and walk through the whole story. And it was pretty moving listening to him. He basically said it was discrimination that I was hired over somebody else that was more qualified than I am because of my skin color. He said that. He also said that.
So he actually said that in the hearing.
That's videotaped. It's in the transcripts and all that. I find the transcripts and pull them up. And it's pretty damning that the agency did that. And he wasn't looking for a new job, and they pulled him away from one job to put him in there, and then they're going to promote him into a different job. And it was all based upon this theory that, based upon your skin color, you're going to be qualified for the job. And that didn't pan out.
And so Mr. Burr says that put him in a
bad spot.
Spot.
He was behind to begin with because he didn't know all these things ahead of time. He just thought he got the job on the merits. And he found out that he didn't. He was very upset about that. And I applaud him for standing up and saying that and defending himself. And I got put in an unattainable situation, and now I'm paying the price for it. I have to clear my name on this because it was not my fault. It was not my intention.
Interesting. So one of the we've been going over DEI in part to just show that the state of Oregon is spending general fund money on this, and it can be controversial. And Oregonians deserve to know how much is being spent on DEI strategies and programs with our agencies. Now, you can argue for it or you can argue against it. The point is money's being spent, and so there needs to be some accountability as to what it's doing. So we've got some of the DEI strategies of OYA, diversifying the workforce, improving outcomes for marginalized youth, embedding equity in operations. And they say it's incorporating an equity lens into policies and practices to eliminate systemic inequities. So, again, the words I always look at is equity lens, because that means different things to different people. But they go on in employee resource groups to support staff from diverse backgrounds, et cetera. But the equity lens guide, OIA utilizes an equity lens guide to ensure that decision-making processes consider the impacts on historically marginalized populations, promoting fairness and inclusivity in all agency actions. Through these initiatives, OIA demonstrates a comprehensive commitment to fostering an inclusive environment that supports both youth and staff from diverse backgrounds. Well, what's interesting is that, from, the 10,000 foot level, that's hard to argue with because, you want people to appreciate historically marginalized populations and what they've gone through and others have gone through. But in practice, what we find is that agencies are all over the board and what that looks like. And we had a episode a while back about DEQ and some of their practices, which got them sued in court. And when you look at some of those things, you just can't believe that on some of the things they're doing. But at least with the OIA and given their mission, and you can appreciate that they want to make sure that there is staff training because there's going to be a lot of, young juveniles who've been adjudicated and had committed serious crimes, and they're going to be a diverse population. And so I suppose you want it. But again, people can argue either way.
Right.
But it sounds like Mr. Byrd did not appreciate the program as applied to him and put him in a tough position.
Yeah, it really did. And I was having the debate with, at that time, the acting director of OIA back and forth about that program specifically. And I made a very comment that I stand by, is that when I was in charge of recruiting at the Portland Police Bureau, it was important for our officers to look like the people in the community because that's policing and that's, they want to be able to relate to them. And then how do you then recruit to find the people that look like you when you show up to a call? And because Portland's a very diverse city, depending on what neighborhood you work in. And I understand that, but you want the most qualified person to be able to accomplish that mission. And that fell short on that. And that's what Raymond Byrd said, that, they fell short. I wasn't the most qualified person for this position. And it really upset him. And the director said, we acknowledge that, we got to do better. But then my colleague that was sitting next to me, she made it a point to say, well, it's really important to do these. And our firefight errors, we try to do the same things. And it was trying to defend their actions with these equity issues and stuff. And you got a lot of money going out in DEI projects that could be spent upgrading facilities, could be spent in training, all that stuff like that.
Well, and I think that what I've said before, and I think is true, is that there's not uniformity across agencies in how this is applied. And so, in any event, let's go on to the next.
Didn't Mr. Byrd also say that he didn't feel as respected because of the DEI aspect of his promotion? I think I read that in the articles.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah,
and which is unfair to him. But he at least indicated that there were some folks working at OIA who didn't respect him because they felt like he wasn't the most qualified. And that, of course, is problematic. And I don't think, again, unfair to him. Now, the office, let's go on to the next slide.
Yeah.
So, $550 million, the governor wants to spend. We obviously need the agency, but this is an agency that has been hit with enormous amount of scandal recently to a large degree because they haven't been accountable. And there hasn't been the proper oversight and supervision that you would expect from agencies. And, to be frank, agencies that are, supposed to be caring for a lot of youth that obviously have committed crimes and have high need for everything from counseling to medical care and et cetera. And so the agency scandal. So Oregon's Juvenile Justice Agency and the Oregon Department of Administrative Services investigation faulted Joe O'Leary, the longtime director, for failing to properly supervise the operation of the Professional Standards Office, creating a safety risk to youth and staff.
Yep.
Next slide. Okay. The review found that the head of the Professional Standards Office, Raymond Byrd, had failed to review his unit's investigation into an estimated 3,000 abuse complaints spanning 7 years. It has also revealed that investigation had not been completed in another 733 cases dating back to 2018. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, Mr. Byrd's on the left, Mr. O'Leary on the right. Why don't you take it from there, since you were in the actual hearing and on the subcommittee in Ways and Means for Public Safety.
So I just pulled up his testimony that he gave in that name clearing thing. And this is what he said. Mr. Byrd said that he did not receive adequate training or performance feedback in his role as chief investigator. He also said his suggestions for improving the way cases were tracked and finalized were ignored. But when he was onboarded, he expressed concern that he got onboarded by an administrative assistant, not by the former chief. So he was set up he was set up to fail. And so through that whole process, they would in your Ways and Means committee, you get chances to ask questions. They have a PowerPoint they go through and all those things. And you have to find your points where you want to ask these questions to make it. But they kind of brushed aside. They said, yes, there's problems. We're trying to clean it up. And everybody's in an acting role. So they're not the ones going to be held accountable. It's the people before them. But my question always when at committee was, what did you know? When did you know about it? And then what did you do about it? And then those three factors there. And so I would love to sit there and say they've done all these bad things, these directors, they're trying, but in that committee, they defended, they didn't really want to talk about the pending litigation because I think it's a $51 million lawsuit for sex abuse. Yeah. I mean, just think about that for a second. You're in custody, supposed to be protected by the state, and then you have predators that are overseeing you and taking advantage of young youth. Alleged, right? Allegations.
Right. Allegations, but not good.
No, it's not good at all. And more people have come forward. And so all those things said, there were all these backlogs, and I kept asking about it. Well, we're gonna work on that. We're gonna work on these professional standards. And my suggestion was you have to pull this investigating unit out of the agency itself and have them a standalone agency to investigate these things. So that way they never get pressure from anybody else. They can go in and investigate these these alleged allegations and not have to worry about what somebody says down the hall. It's in the lunchroom.
Well, it's interesting because I've sat in a lot of committees when I was in the House, and I certainly have sat in a lot this year being in the Senate. And there is a dynamic that happens when a Republican asks tough questions of an agency. And then either all the chairs are Democrats, right? So the chairs or other members start defending the agency just because something triggers in them that says, this Republican's asking tough questions. I know I just had an experience when we had a hearing on the Department of Corrections. It was a joint committee hearing with the House Judiciary Committee. And the chair just flat out wouldn't let me ask the question, and then became indignant when I objected. There was an exchange. And we actually have a clip of it. I mean, because it's on video, but it was.
Was the governor ever told about the code of silence? And if so, when was the governor told?
I'm sorry, we're not going there.
Why not?
I don't think that's applicable to what we're having here. We're looking at, that's getting into what I would call a political realm. And which governor are we talking about? And Mr. Reese, or Director Reese, you've been here, 2 years now?
1 year and 5 months.
Yeah.
So not allowed to ask that question?
You've asked
Chair?
the question. I don't think he has to answer it.
All right, well, he doesn't have to if you direct him not to. I think it is relevant. Wouldn't you agree? What the governor knew, what governor knew it, when they knew it?
Well, the question you asked was very, very big, very broad, and was not descriptive. So if you want to narrow your question to a time frame, we'll see if it's relevant. What happened 20 years ago makes no sense as relevancy today.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think it's very difficult to have hearing that's.
Do you want to reframe your question, or do you just want to talk?
Mr. Chair, I think that's an out-of-line statement.
So here's what I think I'm hearing. I'm hearing is if there
Extraordinarily rude. Those were words from other people and disrespectful, but wouldn't let me. And then when I finally just said, I objected, he said, "Well, you going to ask a question or just talk?" And that was Chair Pozansky. And so there is this dynamic that happens instead of the legislative branch in these committee hearings asking questions in our role as a separate but equal branch of government to the executive branch, when Republicans often get cut off.
Right. That has happened in transportation. That you start asking tough questions. The perception that I have, and it's just my perception, is that the chairs spend so much time with the department heads, the agencies, the directors, and some of their staff. They feel that they're kind of friends. They have a professional relationship, and some of them want to protect them because you don't understand. They're doing the right thing. They've got a lot of stuff on their plate. You don't understand the workload. And it's like, wait a minute, separate yourself from that. We're the ones that are giving the money. We are the ones entrusted by our electors, the people who have elected us, and the electorate to spend the money correctly. And if we're finding where there's fraud, waste, and abuse, and we can try to highlight that, there's the chairs and whoever else, the majority power wants to. Well, we don't want to talk about that here. We just want to hear the story. That's my opinion.
Well, it's an experience that I think a lot of minority members, the Republicans who serve in these committees, I experienced it yesterday in Judiciary Committee. I've experienced it before, and certainly on budget committees. But I don't know if a lot of the folks watching quite understand the dynamic that, when you have a hearing, you're going over a budget of an agency or you're questioning an agency that has had, a scandal or legacy of incompetence or just perhaps malfeasance by a couple of people that have led to litigation and things like that, when you're cut off from asking questions, what happens is the people aren't getting the service of the legislative branch that our founders set up, and they're not getting the service that they expect when they send us here to Salem to ask tough questions. We're not here to rubber stamp agencies. We're not here to just rubber stamp the executive branch.
No, we're not.
And yet we find all too often that not only are we outvoted because the voters chose to put one party in charge of every facet of Oregon's government,
right?
And but we get that we're outvoted, but you have a vote and you have your voice, and they can't take our vote from us. But I have seen time and time again they try to limit our voice, and why they do it baffles me. Is it because they're advocating, in your opinion, for the status quo, or they're trying to, they have a relationship with an agency, and some people are just uncomfortable with conflict. They just are uncomfortable when committees get a little lively.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The conflict part for me is like you have to have conflict because you have to work through things to get to a good result. And when you talked about limiting our ability to speak, you are now seeing that more, especially when we have these, when you're presenting so if you're at the dais and you have a bill, you go down and present to the committee, generally they give the courtesy as electeds, we get more time to speak. But when you bring witnesses in to talk about stuff, they'll have a public hearing on the things that were presented, they're putting timers on people. We've got so many people, we can only go 2 minutes instead of extending the committee, and they want to condense stuff down. And then all of a sudden at the end, hey, we're sorry, we weren't able to get your opinions on the record, verbally, but you can submit your testimony online. And I've got good staff, but reading every single piece of testimony is tough sometimes.
Well, the volume of it, and when you're you see it on the website, OLIS, Oregon. Well, no, it's Oregon Legislative Information System, OLIS.
OLIS, yeah.
Okay, so what I do, especially given the volume of submitted written testimony, is I will scan through, because witnesses are required to list, where they're from, and I look for towns in my district.
Yep.
And if someone's from my district, Senate District 30, I read it.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you have 300-400 submissions, you're not going to read all of them. And I focus on my district. And then I'm also, will pop around to my neighboring districts, whether it might be from Enterprise or LeGrand or Bend or something like that. I'll read it because, it's important to know. But boy, cutting off questions is, I spoke this morning during a remonstrance. And a remonstrance is that time where a member of the Senate or the House can speak on any subject. And in the Senate, we get 2 minutes. In the House, you get 3 minutes.
3 minutes, yep.
And I spoke today on the voice of the minority. And I reminded Democrats in the Senate, I represent the same amount of constituents that they represent. And when they limit my ability to ask questions, they're limiting 140,000 constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be uncomfortable with me asking tough questions of agencies, but doggone it, 140,000 people sent me here. I don't think they sent me here to rubber stamp agencies or the executive branch. And so when they say you can't ask that question, or, they say, no, that's off topic. That's not relevant. You can't ask that. Or, they interrupt you and then you go to respond. They talk over you.
Mm-hmm.
And when
Not
they
quite gaveling you down, but pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, you should watch a clip of what Judiciary Committee yesterday. I mean, it was really over the top. And but when they do that, as I said on the Senate this morning, on the floor, is that when you limit the voice of the minority, that's 140,000 people, just like the other senators represent. And it's not our job to rubber stamp agencies. It's our job to ask tough questions. That's how government gets better. You can't get to the right answers if you're not asking tough questions. And so that gamemanship is frustrating. And frankly, it's uncalled for. They have the votes,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Democrats are going to move on a party line, whatever they want. And now they don't always move bills, because they may have reasons not to that all of us Republicans oppose. But at the end of the day, they're going to win the vote.
Yeah.
And
They're going to win every time.
And they have a governor who's a Democrat. And I assume at some point they're going to ask her, hey, you going to sign this? And but committee time is an opportunity to vet these agencies, to vet their budgets, to ask about uncomfortable things. And if we can't do that, Oregon gets worse government.
As we sit here and talk about this, really what the executive branch has is power to influence these agencies and putting people that will carry their water that they want to move forward, whatever agency it is.
A governor can point who she wants.
And so when you have that, that's when we hear us talk about the status quo, that's what they think. Like, this is what the governor wants. We're going to be able to get this. And legislature, yeah, you guys are here. You may or may not approve stuff, but we're going to eventually get what we want. It's just feeling like, well, here's our budget. Just go ahead and approve it, and we're done. And you try to push back, and you ask questions. You get gavel down or get told you can't ask that question anymore. You can actually ask a question. And that's just kind of part of that status quo that we see, I think, more and more. And when you're not inside the building, pulling the curtain back and looking what's going on, that's what I mean when I say that status quo, because here's our budget, we'll get it approved. We know what we want, unless it's a high profile thing, like, I don't know, transportation.
Well, because the only way in transportation they're going to solve, at least from their perspective, I don't know, you sit on it, but is a significant tax increase for different types of things. But, we have accountability issues. That's a separate podcast, I guess.
Yeah. But this is still accountability with OIA, right?
With OIA. And asking, so what we found out is that Raymond Byrd, Mr. Byrd, who we talked about, the chief investigator responsible for handling abuse complaints, reportedly never accessed or reviewed the complaint database in over 5 years. Okay, that's bad.
That's really bad. Yep.
Director Joe O'Leary failed to intervene or question the backlog despite being in position of authority since 2018. Internal concerns raised by staff reportedly went unaddressed or were dismissed or minimized by upper management. Now, these are all things that should be asked about and vetted in a hearing. The Professional Standards Office lacked basic operational oversight. There were no routine audits or checks to ensure abuse reports were being investigated. OIA apparently had no external review board, as you were mentioning, or inspector general system that could intervene when internal mechanisms failed. And, you mentioned that, and I speculate, but I don't think independent review is all that common in the executive branch. Now, we know the Secretary of State, who currently is Tobias Reed,
Mm-hmm.
and he has in his office audit functions. And so the Secretary of State will actually review some of this stuff. And so you can get, if a Secretary of State is doing his or her job, some reviews. Now, of course, that's what got Secretary of State Shemia Fagan in problems because of an audit system with the Oregon Liquor Cannabis Commission.
Yep.
And her ties to some folks who tried to influence that audit, but that's a different subject. But at any event, reports suggested, at least in the OIA, some staff feared retaliation or felt ignored when they raised concerns. Internally, no effective public tracking existed for unresolved allegations. There were little transparency or accountability. These were the recently discovered in the Oregon Youth Authority. Let's go to the next slide.
I would stop you there for a second. When you talk about the state has no mechanism other than the Secretary of State.
Well, I think it's rare for an agency to have external,
right,
like you just mentioned.
Yeah. And I walk back for all the faults the city of Portland has. They have this independent police review commission that's where the complaints go through, and that's how they're vetted. When an officer there's allegations of misconduct or whatever it is, that goes through them first, and then they basically look at it and say, yes, there's merit, or no, there's not merit. And then if there is merit, it goes to internal affairs, or if it's a learning moment, it gets pushed back to the precinct. That's what I was talking about with them, is having a independent thing, and whether it's for all state agencies, but have this independent oversight that people can go to, because it talked about they felt they could be retaliated against and weren't being heard. And that's where I think the next step in any of this is this accountability portion. And whatever agency it is, you have to have oversight. And what does that look like? And it can't just be, well, the agency head needs to have this oversight. Well, what if he's doing things wrong and he doesn't realize it? Best practices.
And I think the fact is, the rule of law is paramount, not trying to protect an agency reputation, or, to be frank, protect the coffers of the state of Oregon from litigation. Mm-hmm. And for people who have been injured or wronged. And, there has to be transparency. And the only way you're going to get that is bringing things to the light. And part of our function in our three separate but equal branches is legislative branch asking tough questions, which I'm hitting this theme over and over and over because we're seeing it happen right now in the legislative session of reducing the voice of Republicans in committees, not letting them ask questions, and it's a weird dynamic where it's like sometimes these committee chairs, it's like they almost get offended if you begin to question the status quo.
Right. And you were leader, I was leader. And one of the times I found out where people get uncomfortable is where if you get a truly independent newspaper, somebody sniffing around a story, they get some information. That's really, when it makes the headlines, that's when the status quo gets very uncomfortable, gets squeamish, because all of a sudden it's out there. The dirty laundry's been shown to the public, and that is where change, or at least the perception of change, starts. That's what happened. That's what happened with this right here.
Well, and, Mr. Byrd resigned earlier this year when confronted with initial findings of the review. Last week, one day before the state released additional details showing the scope of the crisis, Governor Tina Kotek fired O'Leary. The unit charged with investigating complaints also was slow to respond to a 2024 complaint about a staff forcing 2 youths to kiss for a food reward, end quote. Earlier that year, the investigation said. Now, so one thing I will acknowledge is the executive branch had an investigation and they brought it to light. Good on them. And so, Governor Tina Kotek and her staff who made that decision should be complimented, because eventually, after long delays, 5 years, 6 years, whatever, eventually it was investigated, and they have since brought this out. Now, you could fault them for the length of time, but I also want to acknowledge they did the right thing by bringing it to the light.
Right. So I was finding, I was kind of going through some stuff that before I was preparing for that committee, and the DAS hearing, which is Department of Administrative Services, did the name clearing, and one of the hearing was back in March 21st, but the main findings from that investigation that really rocked the OIA and systemic failures, and they uncovered it, was I'll give you a brief overview. Sex abuse allegations. Multiple lawsuits allege that OIA staff, including the former chief medical officer, engaged in widespread sexual misconduct over decades. Negligent investigations. Reports indicate that OIA ignored abuse claims, and with Mr. Byrd's office facing criticism for failing to address a backlog of cases. Federal oversight failures. OYA facilities rank among the worst in the nations for sex abuse, with data showing that 14% of the female detainees at Oak Creek Youth Correctional Facility reported sex assault in 2018. Let that sink in for a second. How does that get covered up? How does that not get investigated? I mean, we're talking about the budgets and we're talking about accountability. We hold the purse strings, but then when you get gavelled down and you can't ask a question because you're making people feel uncomfortable, and yet you have all these allegations, but people, they're allegations until they're proven true or false. But that's a lot of stuff right there.
Oh my gosh, yes. And yes. And, now they're facing lawsuits and frankly, who's going to fault someone for bringing a lawsuit if they've suffered that horrific abuse?
Let me ask you the lawsuit. So we're talking budgets, talking money. So I know when the city of Portland would be sued, they had a certain amount that they were self-insured with that they could pay out on a lawsuit. Then if it went over a certain dollar amount, then they had like the Lords of London or whatever it is, the big insurance carrier that would figure that out. Do you know how the state works, or does it just come out of the general fund with a lawsuit that all has to be paid?
I do believe it comes out of the general fund. It's I think that this is my understanding, and I'm not saying it's completely accurate, but it's my understanding is that there is an appropriation to the Department of Administrative Services, DAS, which is know, the way the state administers its agency is through the DAS, and that the legislature appropriates money in a pot, and that's to resolve litigation claims. And if they need more, there's the emergency board and other ways they can get more. And if they pay out less, and I imagine that's reported back as carryover. But I don't believe we have an insurer. I believe the state of Oregon is self-insured.
That kind of circles all the way back around to the hiring practices and getting the right people. If people are hired, they're in these positions that are qualified and doing the job that they're supposed to do, and not having all these missteps and taking care of problems early and often, then those dollars that were normally paid out in lawsuits could be used other places, even though it's a reserve fund. But right. This shows that this incompetence, this hiring philosophies, whatever it is, that this is what causes taxpayers their dollars to go other places instead of going for the services that they thought they're paying for.
Well, and there is that, and then of course when you have people in the care of an agency, whether people at the state hospital or the Department of Corrections or Oregon Youth Authority, you know, being victims of abuse of power and sexual abuse. I mean, it's awful and uncalled for and should never happen. And so there's two sides to that. One, there's the money that the state pays out, but there's also people who have to live the rest of their lives with that sort of trauma.
Two very, I'd say, unique individuals sitting here. You're an attorney and a lawyer and a lawmaker. You know, I was a police officer and a lawmaker. And when we have people in our custody, or you would sentence people to for their whatever they did when you were on the bench, and there's a reasonable expectation, you would believe, that once we take somebody's civil liberties away from them, incarcerate them, or put them in the state hospital, that they should be protected and not be fearful of sexual assault, bad things happening to them, right? And yet that's just another failure of the system, because we didn't protect them. It's not, they have to be held accountable. Make no mistake, the youth that were there have done bad things. And they're trying to be recovered, but then they become a victim. Then they become a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. And all right, let's go to the next slide. So this were just different things about at MacLaren Youth Correctional Facility in Woodburn, I guess not Wilsonville, sorry about that, but 10 men allege that Dr. Gary Edwards, this is an allegation, the facility's chief medical officer, sexually abused them between 2000 and 2008 when they were between 12 and 16 years old. The lawsuit claims that despite multiple reports, the abuse was allowed to continue. Now, that's a lawsuit and subject to the courts. We're just simply relaying what the allegations were. Again, at Oak Creek Youth Correctional Facility, it was alleged that the lawsuits have said staff members engaged in sexual misconduct with incarcerated youth. The suits allege that staff provided drugs, engaged in sexual relationships, and threatened youth to prevent them from reporting the abuse. And so, again, these are lawsuits and allegations, but it's part of what's happening at the agency. It's current. We're bringing it up. So not good at all. This agency has problems, and there's going to have to be an accounting, obviously, of the people who have been accused, and then eventually, if proven, compensation for those victims.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next. These are just more allegation. Again, what he just moved on that.
Well, I think we should read this line. That's a big one. I mean, I can say it. So apparently, this is just what I've read, is that Byrd was asked why he didn't have time to do these allegations, why he didn't get there, right? And he said He had received little to no onboarding when he was hired, and that he was assigned to DEI duties that took away, quote, quite a bit of time from his investigative responsibilities. And he did not have time to investigate these complaints because he was busy with his DEI duties. That's an incredible statement to me.
Yeah, it is. And that was said at, I believe, his name clearing hearing. It's hard to know what happened, to be frank, as we sit here, but that's quite a shocking statement.
Yeah, there's always two sides to the story.
Right.
Show up to call it. Right somewhere in the middle is exactly what happened. And
Hard to know.
Yeah.
But it's one thing's for sure, it was a mess. Let's go to the next slide.
I think that's
Mac.
the end. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that happens, I think, as we go through these agencies is not just budget, but now affecting the budget and the budget of all of us, as you said, litigation, accountability failures. So that's the Oregon Youth Authority. And I got to tell you, it has shocked a lot of people in Salem, when this came to light. A lot of folks wanted to know when it became apparent, who knew, when they knew it. We may not get to the bottom. The court process is going on. I respect the court process, so I'm not going to comment on the lawsuits. But one thing's for sure, this agency needs massive reform. And they have if the governor gets what she's asking for, $550 million budget over a 2-year period of Raymond Byrd. So this is a lot of money.
And there's a lot of money's rolling out with not a lot of accountability.
Yeah, when we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, this is definitely, you could argue about there's been some waste and et cetera, but clearly abuse.
Yeah.
And
and we're not talking about people taking trips to Hawaii on the company dime.
No.
We're talking about real legitimate abuse
and
allegations.
we've heard about the clean water services out in Washington County and extravagant spending on trips and dinners and things. That's waste.
Right.
Obviously, abuse of power is a whole different kind of bad, and this is bad. And but we wanted to air it out. That's the Oregon Youth Authority. And that wraps it up. And now, again, you're on the the Public Safety Subcommittee.
Yep.
And just to kind of close this out, what was it like going? I mean, it was after the scandal came to light.
Yeah, there were some people that were very uncomfortable in there when we started asking questions because you could have heard a pin drop. And to the credit of the co-chair, he let me ask questions. He didn't stop me. And Senator Broadman, and to his credit, he didn't pull what your chair did to you and not ask questions. Because I'm going to ask some tough questions. He goes, ask tough questions. Go ahead. You have to answer them.
Well, good on Anthony Broadman, Senator from Bend. So, and that's the process. And
it is the process.
And even when it's uncomfortable, we have to ask tough questions. Okay, that's it for this episode on the Oregon Youth Authority.
There we go.
Thank you much,
Thanks,
my
Mike.
friend.
Yeah, you too.
All right.